Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Thank you for Blue Water Cruising Association for hosting this event. Now we're going to talk about inverters or inverter chargers. A little bit more complicated. And I saw another spec sheet from another builder. We do a lot of design work. And I was looking at a spec sheet from a builder, a reputable builder. And in the spec sheet, there was talking about a Magnum inverter charger with 3 outputs. I was like, wow, that's amazing. Doesn't exist. Sounds promising. There's no such thing. And even builders sometimes, it's confusing, honestly. You can't be everything to everyone in life. And when you have an inverter charger, unless you have an old Freedom inverter charger, which had echo chargers on there, 99% of us have a single output inverter charger, meaning you can only charge one battery bank, and only one battery bank alone is charged from an inverter charger directly. Okay? There's other ways of sharing that charge through other devices, but the inverter charger is a single output device. Magnum, Victron, Mastervolt, there's no such thing as 2 outputs on an inverter charger. It's an inverter charger. It doesn't do multiple battery banks. And so if you look at this inverter here, it's only going to be connected to one battery bank and one battery bank alone. Okay? This is very important. Your inverter does not, or inverter charger, is not going to be charging, especially multiple battery banks. It can only be connected to one battery. There's only one DC supply. So when it inverts, it pulls. When it charges, it pushes. Right? Here I'm showing what an inverter service disconnect is. By the way, an inverter manual is about 70 to 100 pages. That is way too much reading for anyone. Okay? I would say that about 98% of all inverter chargers are badly installed on all boats. So if you have an inverter charger on your boat, I high five an owner when I find a boat with a properly installed inverter charger. I literally, if I had champagne, I'd pop a champagne bottle open. That is how rare it happens. I get to see a boat with a properly installed inverter charger maybe once a year, maybe. Every inverter charger I've ever seen is badly installed. Doesn't matter who did it, what it is. There's no way they're going to read the manual. They can't be bothered. It's 100 pages. It's so complicated. Why do they, and it looks so simple. I mean, it came in the box. It seems so innocent. It's like the person that doesn't read the IKEA instructions when they're building a piece of furniture. Hey, this is easy. I got this. How many of you have successfully built anything with IKEA without reading the instructions? It's impossible. You can't do it. It's impossible. It's never happened. You miss a step, you're screwed. You miss a step, you didn't read the instructions, you're screwed. And so we'll talk about all the screw-ups that go with inverter chargers. And there's so many because the manual is just so damn thick. All right, so what's the purpose of an inverter first? We talked about the word converter before. Remember I said converter goes this way, inverter goes this way, right? So an inverter creates AC. That's the purpose. AC is like outlets in our houses. All our homes are run on AC, right? So you're going to do it to run a microwave. You could run it to run a TV. You could, like, we have an espresso machine on our boat. It could be whatever. You could even run a hot water tank. You shouldn't, but you could. You could run, on some big boats, we'll run air conditioning units off of it. Can do it. Now it gets a huge inverter system. But you can do, I've got owners that have 80, 90 footers. We wash washing machines, dryers. But they have a battery bank, you know, like the size of this area. You know, of course, it's doable. And we run, you know, you can run a town on an inverter. It happens. You can do whatever you want. It's definitely doable, but you need a hell of a battery bank to do it. For most of us, we're going to reduce our consumption by limiting the amount of things that we can do off an inverter. Right? It's like having a black Amex. If I had a black Amex and I could spend as much money as I want, it'd be fun for a little while until I realized that I'd have to pay the bill. And the problem with an inverter is it draws power at a very, very high rate. And so you want to limit your ability to not do things that would be foolish, like running a heater off an inverter, right? Or running a battery charger off of an inverter, right? It's the opposite of the Da Vinci machine, right? You can't create AC to give back DC. You're just going to go into a spiral of death and your battery's going to drain itself. And I see battery chargers running off inverters all the time. About 10% of the boats have battery chargers connected to the inverter. Unrelated, their batteries die all the time. And they don't know. The owners don't know. It's unbeknown to them. They thought that whoever did it would have done it smart. You know, you wouldn't run a battery charger from an inverter because you're literally taking money from yourself to pay back yourself, and there's a middleman in the middle. And every time you do a transaction, they're taking 15 points. So you lose 15 points, and eventually you run out of money. So you can't have certain loads running off of an inverter, okay? One of the questions I got on YouTube was, well, what's wattage? What does that mean? So 2,000 watt, 200 watt, 3,000 watt. Some people have 6,000 watt inverters. We stack them. I was on a boat that had 20,000 watt inverters. It was like crazy. It doesn't matter. The question is, what are you going to run on your boat, right? What do you need to run on your boat? Some people, they say to me, they say, Jeff, I want to run a coffee pot or a microwave. Well, that's less than 2,000, about 1,200, 1,500. Some people say, I want to run two things at the same time. I want a convection oven and I want a coffee pot at the same time. Now you start adding up, maybe 4,000, right? Or, Jeff, I just want to run a TV and I just want to charge a laptop. Nothing else, 300 watt, right? So all our appliances have wattage ratings on them. And so you end up sizing all the things you might load on the inverter, and you decide, am I going to run them concurrently, like a hairdryer, and the microwave, and a coffee pot at the same time? Or will you do on a sailboat, which I encourage people to do, is like, well, how about you run them sequentially? You know, do the hairdryer first, then say, okay, we're done with the hairdryer, then we'll do a microwave. Once we're done with the microwave, then we'll do an espresso. But running them concurrently means you get a huge inverter, large battery bank, huge cables. And so it sounds great until you realize the price you have to pay, okay? So that's really essential, is the wattage of the inverter. And they come from as low as 100 watts up to single units or even 5,000. And there's bigger commercial units, there's no end. But on boats, it's about 5,000, and then after that you end up stacking them. You'll end up stacking multiple of them together, that they work together to make you run larger loads, okay? So on the AC side, the diagram before that I was showing, that's just the DC side, but look at how complicated the AC side of an inverter is, right? An inverter is one of those things that come off of the main AC panel. It goes into this device, and then it goes back in, and it goes through what are called inverter loads or AC pass-through. These loads over here, the fridge, the AC outlets, the microwave, they can run off the inverter, or they can run off shore power, or they can run off the generator. And so do you notice how these two items are sort of a Y, right? Two inputs going to one output. And then this goes in, and if this senses AC, it says, I know you told me to be an inverter, but that's silly. You don't mean it. You mean when you lose AC, I'll invert for you. It's a conditional inverter. And that's called pass-through. That is probably one of the misunderstood items on boats and inverters by far. Number one, there's no second place. You can have your inverter having loads go through it even when you're on shore power, because they want the ability of having automatic switching, right? They're doing basically an automatic Y. If I sense AC and you ask me to be an inverter, I won't do it. You're silly. You don't really mean that. Because I've got AC, I'll just let it through. Pass through. If you ask me to be an inverter and I don't have AC, I'll invert for you. So inverters are generally conditional. They're only inverting if they don't sense AC. And that's pretty much like 95% of all inverters. Okay. Remember, chargers have to be marine. I can't emphasize that enough. Inverters have to be marine. If you take a shortcut there, welcome to World of Hurt. World of Hurt. And if you have a powerboat and you got two props, and some props are not like $100, they're thousands of dollars, and your shafts are big, you are in a world of pain. A world of pain. And when that happens, by the way, you don't lose a week, okay? Like we do a lot of galvanic surveys and, for insurance companies. When you lose all your underwater metals, you miss your boating season. Like it's done. So it's over. Like the repair is not going to happen overnight. You're on the hard. Before the insurance, the adjuster comes in. They all agree for the damage, and they start, and then they have to other people to check that it's not going to happen again. You're out of commission 2 months, 3 months, 4 months. That summer, you lost your boat. And you're only going to find out when? At the start of the season when people start boating. When you put it in gear and you don't feel anything. You're like, it's not going. What's going on? I have no props. Is my transmission not working? It's your prop is evaporated. Okay. The other big thing too is inverters have this thing. Cheap inverters have really high idle draw, meaning that even when you're not using it and nothing's plugged in the wall and you set invert, it's going to draw a lot of amperage. just to have it on waiting for you is huge. Some of the inverters are going to draw more power than your refrigerator just when they're on idle. That's huge. Remember I told you that a refrigerator is like 80% of your income? An inverter is another 80% of something you didn't have. So I have some inverters that draw an idle 4 or 5 amps just sitting there, just waiting. No, they're not doing anything. They're just waiting for you to put a load, which is equal to more than what the boat is drawing for refrigeration. So you got to make sure that you have low idle draw inverters.
How can you tell that?
Well, you just don't buy a cheap one. Okay. Anything that's brand name is fine. Again, this is the thing. People think that there's deals. Nobody shops with cars looking at least expensive and like, babes, I found it, $1. My God, I have no idea why people would spend 20 grand on a car. We found one for $1. Smoking? No. No, there's no such thing. They're just removing all of the features that you would in a good one, but you just don't know. Can you wait for the end, or is this relevant now? Yeah, just a couple. I'll come back to you, okay? So popular models, Xantrax is really popular. It's a budget inverter. And then other ones are Victron, Xantrax, Mastervolt is amazing, Magnum is really good. Again, brand names, okay? Like there's lots of choice, lots of choice. There is no place on a boat for a modified sine wave inverter, period. It's a black and white statement. That choice was possible 20 years ago when they were expensive. I've been in the business for only 12 years and I've never installed a modified sine wave. I refused to at the beginning. I said, no, I can't do it. It's not sound. It doesn't make sense. Modified sine wave inverters are, okay, so what's sine? Sine is us, the moon, the seasons. Like our moods are sinusoidal. Everything in life, the tides, everything is sinusoidal. That's it. It's literally fall, spring, winter, summer. All of that is sinusoidal. AC is the same thing. And what they did in the late 1990s and early 2000 is true sine wave inverters were expensive, and they started making what are called square waves. So it would be going from high tide to low tide in an instant. Literally, like the water is gone. It could be like, suddenly it's low tide, and then suddenly it's high tide. No change over. What happens is that's okay. Modified sine wave, square wave, is okay for resistive loads. Resistive loads are your toaster, heater, anything like, think about a toaster. It's just a heating element. No problem on square wave, no problem. Inductive loads do not like modified sine wave. And what's an inductive load? Your microwave, a TV, a sound system, power tools, battery chargers, Nespresso machine, blenders. Pretty much everything that you want other than toaster is a true sine wave. And I had an owner once call me, 3 Nespressos burnt out. First, this is not a client. First Nespresso goes out. This is ridiculous. I bought a Nespresso and it failed. Oh, come on. Brings back the Nespresso machine, puts it back on, a new one on board, fails again. Irate. This is ridiculous. Like, come on, people. Like it's an Nespresso, you can't know quality control. Brings a 3rd one on board, blows up again. I wonder if it's me. Yeah, I don't know. I wonder. Yeah, 3 in a row. Oh, what's the only thing that's common here? I wonder. Can you imagine the manufacturer had to eat 2 inverters? They're not thinking it's going on a modified sine wave, right? I get a call. He's like, my Nespressos are blowing up. I have no idea why. Can you come in? Sure enough, running a modified sine wave inverter. Modified sine wave inverter. If you have one, your microwave doesn't work as well. You're on shore power, water warms up in 2 minutes, or whatever you're putting, soup. You put it on modified sine wave, you don't have shore power, it takes you 5. Because the microwave hates it. Some people are going to see lines on the TV. You know the refresh rate? Some people have a really amazing eye. They'll see a line go down the TV. Like, I can't see it, but I've had a lot of boaters like, yeah, I'm seeing a line come down the TV. Only on the inverter. As soon as you go to shore power, the line is away. Because again, it's a square wave. There is no reason to put a square wave inverter on your boat. And square wave inverters are about like 5 times as inefficient. I've had an owner once where the fridge was almost built around the boat. Like, if you take the fridge out, you first cut it off. Like, you can't take it out. There's no door that's going to, I mean, they're literally probably like, ha, 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 ha. You know, this fridge is going in. I don't know who's going to take it out, but this is hilarious. They literally put the fridge in. They did the cabinets around. Like, this thing is in there. Like, it's built in the boat. And he's like, changing the fridge would be like a mountain. It's like, you got to cut it up. It's a custom size. There's no replacement. It'd be crazy. And so the owner had a modified sine wave inverter. And the only reason we changed the inverter was for a true sine wave, because a good true sine wave inverter is only about 5% inefficient. And that modified sine wave was 35%. So he saved 30% of his power draw to run his fridge just by going with true sine wave. And that's suddenly the fridge got 30% more efficient. And so I've done that on a trawler. It was about a 55-foot trawler. We just changed the inverter for no other reason than I can't change my fridge, and I want the power efficiency. So no for modified sine wave. You go true or don't do it. Just don't do it. There's no reason, honestly. You're going to hate yourself. Honestly, it's going to be a bad decision. There's not a lot of shortcuts in life that lead to good outcomes. Okay, very few, and this would not be one of them. Okay, this is the list of things that are required to properly install an inverter. And believe it or not, that's what, 6 items? Not 1% of boaters have that. It's too many variables. It's like 649. It would imply reading a manual, and nobody can do it. And the challenge is the boat builders would do it, but very few boat builders install inverters at the factory. Inverters are generally an add-on at the commissioning stage. Very few boats come with inverters. Very few. And if they do, sometimes what the boat builders do is they do it, but they don't really have it as part of their spec sheet. They add it later. And so it doesn't go through the same engineering department. It's sort of like get it done department. And the get it done department is not really bound by having an engineer read specs and tell you what to do. They just need to get it done. And when you get it done, you basically forget to put a cast T fuse. That's super common. Or wrong fuse type. They don't put, you can see one over here. It's an on-off service disconnect. They don't have that because, it works without it. Like my car, true story, I can drive my car without ever buckling into my seatbelt, and it works fine. But the flip side is I also know through horror stories that it's probably a good idea to buckle up. And so you want a fuse and an inverter disconnect. The inverter-only neutral bus, well, that is way off people's pay grade. It's way too complicated. It involves surgery, so nobody does that. So it's hope. That's the AC panel. It works. There's magic happening on the AC system, unrelated, but it works, so they just let it go. Chassis ground, again, it's like a seat belt. You don't really need it, or it's like you don't really need it till you're in an accident. And your chassis ground, I've seen that is over like 95% of boats have it or don't even have the right wire size. Again, all of this is in the manual, by the way, but it is a 90-page manual. DC wire size, again, too expensive, can't be bothered, didn't read the manual, and so they end up having the wires that are connected to the inverter charger are undersized, and the distance of the inverter to the battery bank is too long. Again, all of this in the manual. I'm not making this stuff up, but they don't do it. And then lastly is you can never, ever, 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 ever have an inverter charger in a gasoline engine room, and I see that in about at least 20% of the gasoline boats we survey. And the reason is they didn't read the manual, and they thought, I had a charger there, and this is an inverter charger, same word, must be the same, and hence they install it. And an inverter, there is no such thing as an ignition-protected inverter charger. No such thing. It does not exist. There's not a single one out there. And then what people do is they get creative. They don't install it in the engine room, but they create a huge hole, and they install it above in sort of where the, let's say, the fridge is. And they're like, well, it's not in the engine room. I'm like, yes, you've met the letter of the law. But the spirit of the law is that your engine room is just there. Like they're communicating. The vapors don't stop at the arbitrary ceiling. Like if it's an open hole, it's going to go up. He's like, yeah, I guess I didn't think of that. I'm like, yeah, you didn't. And I mean, now you can go out, and I tell people all the time, you got to remember this. This is the craziest thing about boats, is that all of us have a different risk profile in life. All of us. Some people are pretty safety conscious, some people aren't. The challenge with a boat is you can go skydiving by yourself, but when you go boating, you're bringing other people for the ride. And they don't know what your risk tolerance is, right? They're not sort of questioning like, are we going skydiving? Are we going to have one parachute or two? Are you trained? Do you know what you're doing, right? They assume, and that's what happens, is that's what's so disconcerting for some of us, is you assume that this other boater is sort of like the minimum bar. Like they're not going to be willing to do things just for time or money to sacrifice their lives. But you'd be surprised that if people didn't have to have a seatbelt in their car and it was an option, and they could remove $75 off the build, most people would choose to remove a seatbelt, parking brakes, airbags. They would remove the options because they figure, well, it's not going to happen to me. And that's why a lot of stuff on boats are shortcuts. But if you're super safety conscious, maybe for yourself or maybe because of your loved ones, it depends. Some people are, some people aren't. You got to ask yourself, and you worry about the previous owner that wasn't. And so when I tell people you buy a boat, don't just buy the boat, buy the previous owner. His philosophy or her philosophy of boat ownership is what affects everything that they did from a maintenance perspective on that boat. And I always tell you, make sure you buy a boat from someone who's like-minded to you. Because if they took shortcuts, and they're taking shortcuts and they didn't let you, they're not putting tags everywhere. Oh, here's a shortcut I took, shortcut. It's for you to uncover that over time. And then you end up spending crazy amount of money to undo the shortcuts. And that's where boat ownership is so expensive, is because you end up fixing other people's mistakes. So, all right, with that, I'm going to open the floor to questions. Any questions on inverter chargers? When I'm shore power generator, should I close off or turn off my inverter? So the answer is yes and no. At the same time. At the same time. And this is very important. Remember, most inverters nowadays are inverter chargers. So on your AC panel, you should, and if you don't, you need one, and that's another thing that's missing. You should have a breaker that says inverter on your AC panel. There should be a breaker somewhere that says inverter. You should have that. That breaker should never, ever, 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 ever be turned off. Because if you turn that off, you're not just shutting off the inverter, you're shutting off the AC going into the inverter, which is feeding either pass-through or charger. You're not actually shutting down the inverter, you're shutting down pass-through and charger. Hence why it's so complicated. Because an inverter charger is two things. Unfortunately, a lot of the manufacturers of panels don't have inverter charger as a sticker. And so the only sticker they have is inverter. So you should never, ever shut off your inverter charger at the AC panel. Because when you do that, you not only stop AC going through the inverter, you stop AC going to the inverter charger, and the charger needs AC to recharge your batteries. So that's the no part. Never, ever disconnect your inverter charger at the AC panel, ever. It's circuit protection. It's like your breakers in your house, somewhere in the basement. How often do you go turn those on and off? Never. Unless you're playing with something, but they're always there. They're protection. It's a thermal circuit breaker that if it trips, you can reset. It's only there for protection. It's not there meant for be a switch, okay?
But that's only if you have an inverter charger.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
That's right.
Not a proper.
But the inverter gets complicated too, but let's do with inverter charger because it affects 90%, 95%. Then, at the inverter, you should have a remote panel, or the inverter itself should have a button, and if you don't, you need one, that you can disable the inverter on a little on-off button. You say to the inverter over a telephone wire, I want you to stop being an inverter. So yes, you should disable your inverter at a control panel or the inverter itself when you're on shore power or connected to a generator. If you want it, because you don't need an inverter at that point, and you don't want your inverter to turn on when it doesn't need to. So it's complicated, right? It's not easy, but that's the rule. Never disconnect at the AC panel, ever, ever. That's a black and white. And at the remote panel, you can turn it on or off, but do so, like I always encourage people to not have their inverter enabled when they're away from the boat for months on end. Because you don't want your inverter to turn on and run your fridge or your heater for 2 hours and kill your batteries. You're going to lose what's in the fridge. You're going to lose the heat in your boat anyways. An extra 2 hours won't make a difference. Don't have your inverter keep your boat warm. Because I told you, you can't make hot water with batteries. You can't certainly heat your boat with batteries. It's not going to work. Inverters also have pass-through. So if it's an inverter that has pass-through, you want to leave that inverter breaker there as well, because that's the input, which means if you don't have AC going in, there's no AC going out. The way to shut off a small little inverter is to stop the DC side on the supply, because an inverter pulls DC, pushes out AC, right? That's what an inverter does. A converter does the opposite. It takes AC, makes DC. An inverter takes DC and goes to AC. Remember, they were opposite directions? And so, I know, I'm hearing myself. I'm like, oh my God, this is so hard. It's so mental. But that's the rule. So the question is, if I have an inverter charger and I have 2 battery banks on my boat, I have simply a house battery and an engine battery, and I have an inverter charger, and my inverter charger only has a single output, how will my inverter charger charge back my engine battery if it's connected to my house? One way would be having another AC to DC device, which again is a charger, a single output charger just for that battery. Or one thing we're going to talk in the afternoon, because we're going to stop after this, another way would be a battery combiner, would be a way to share a charge from one battery to another battery. And that's how you would do that. And that's a battery combiner. Okay? So either a battery charger, dedicated battery charger, or battery combiners. Let's be back for 1:30. Okay?